Hello there, I'm Tommy, welcome to Blitz Transmissions, and today's video is going to be just a little kind of ranty video about something that I've been noticing a lot, and I felt like I wanted to just say my piece on and put it out there into the internet. And so the topic of this little rant video is basically I think the hypocrisy in the generational hate of Star Wars. It's kind of funny, as more Star Wars content comes out and as more generations and crowds get into Star Wars, there's this almost like elitist gatekeeping mentality. I know this isn't exclusive to just Star Wars, and I know that every other franchise has the same issue, especially nowadays where they're rebooting pretty much every franchise that occurred in like the 70s and 80s, but I don't know, I just figured with Star Wars it's been so prominent recently that I feel like I wanted to just make a little video on it. So me, myself, I'm a fan of everything Star Wars. If you couldn't tell from what's behind me here, if you couldn't tell from the channel, I love pretty much everything that comes out that's Star Wars. I obviously like some stuff way more than I like other stuff, but generally I just kind of like what I'm watching and what I'm reading. So as a kid, I grew up with the prequel trilogy, but I'd argue that even more so I grew up with the Clone Wars animated show from 2008. There's this weird kind of like small generational gap between the people my age who are, in their early to mid 20s who kind of just missed the prequel trilogy. Maybe you were old enough to just go see Revenge of the Sith in the theater, if that. Most of us being too young to have seen any of the prequel trilogy in the theaters, but we still considered ourselves prequel kids until the Clone Wars show came out in 2008, and then I would say for myself and many others my age, that was our Star Wars. And as I got older, I remember hearing all these negative thoughts on the prequel trilogy and the Clone Wars show, and I remember thinking that was so strange because I myself grew up loving this stuff and not thinking there was anything wrong with it. And I think it's interesting to see how it's kind of happening again and kind of being on the other side of that fence and now kind of looking at it from that third-party perspective. It's very interesting how things are unfolding here. So aside from speaking anecdotally, it's very well known in the Star Wars fandom that the prequel trilogy movies were not received very well by the general audience and by a lot of Star Wars fans who grew up with the originals. Whether it was a general distaste for Jar Jar Binks in the first movie, all the way up to people thinking Anakin was a whiny baby in the second and third movies, there's a lot of criticisms that came out of the prequel trilogy. On top of that, you have lots of criticisms about the dialogue and the pacing and the character designs and just a lot of different things that were negative coming out of the movies. And that's not at all to say that the movies were flawless or that I think they're the best movies ever created. However, I personally enjoy them, and I obviously have that biased nostalgia as a kid having grown up with these films. So, I didn't really understand all the hate, and I remember as a kid, you couldn't even talk about the prequel movies or the Clone Wars with a lot of old heads because they were just so focused on talking about the negatives. Very focused on talking about how the prequel trilogy and the Clone Wars show would never be as good as the original trilogy, and it would never amount to Empire, and just lots of negative talk. So then fast forward to the sequel trilogy coming out around 2015 with Force Awakens hitting the theaters. The movie was kind of generally well received, however you had a lot of negative thoughts about the movie being a rehash of A New Hope and yada yada yada. And it wasn't until The Last Jedi came out in 2017 that you really started to see the big disparity between people who were enjoying the stuff, as a lot of them were people who this is their first experience with Star Wars, so they were generally enjoying it, and a lot of fans who had been lifelong fans really having a strong distaste for the new media. And it's kind of funny because I feel like now we're in this revolving door of perpetual hate, because now we're seeing a lot of that same hate for a lot of the Disney Plus series releases that have come out in the last few years. And again, I want to reiterate, I'm not saying that any of these shows are phenomenal, the best piece of media to ever come out. I'm just saying it's interesting to see the amount of hate that they have received and how strikingly similar it is to the hate that the prequels received. Because what's happening now is a lot of fans that grew up with the prequel trilogy and the Clone Wars show are people that I see online being the ones that are hating on the new media and the sequel trilogy. And I definitely want to make clear that I'm not saying that you cannot criticize things, because everyone has criticisms for everything, and I have criticisms for pretty much every piece of Star Wars media there is. However, at the end of the day, I'm a Star Wars fan, and I want to enjoy what I'm watching. And I think it speaks to a larger thing where a lot of Star Wars fans specifically feel like they have some kind of ownership over this franchise because they have such a deep connection with this franchise. I have such a deep connection with this franchise, but at that same time, I don't feel like I have any kind of say over any other Star Wars fan. You know, it's kind of the cliche thing where we are nerds at the end of the day as Star Wars fans, and it's funny because we're always trying to out-nerd each other with what lore we know, who knows the name of this ship, or what the phrase for this is, and in-universe this, in-universe that. And it's kind of interesting because a lot of Star Wars fans, you notice, are starting to like break up into their generational gaps. You have the original trilogy fans, who a lot of them are in their 40s and 50s now, getting a little bit older, reaching unk status, if I may. And, then you also have the people that grew up with the prequel trilogy and grew up with the Clone Wars. And I would say that even though those I would separate into two groups, I mean, we're also kind of reaching that point where we're becoming the people getting angry about all the new media that the young whippersnappers are watching. And it's kind of interesting to see what's going on with the fandom right now. And I think it's very interesting because you're hearing lots of the same arguments being made. I hear lots of people with the new media complain about the dialogue, and that's something people complained about with the prequel trilogy. And I see people complaining about things being canon breaking, whether it's a character's birthday from a CD-ROM or whether it's, something a little bit bigger than that. And if you go back in time, I remember fans having a lot of similar complaints about the prequel trilogy, and it's just very striking when you kind of take a step back and remove your biases as best you can from the situation. You kind of realize how kind of absurd some people are being. And again, I mean, you can go even as extreme as, the hate that the actors and actresses from the prequel trilogy received was so immense that it was really impacting people's lives. And it's happened again with the sequel trilogy, and it's also happened with, the recent Acolyte series. Love or hate it, I personally wasn't a huge fan of the Acolyte series, and I didn't enjoy most of it, to be honest. But again, it's Star Wars, and it's in the universe, and I'd much rather have fun trying to theory craft and make things work and make things fit into the timeline and make sense in my brain than just hating, Star Wars is dead, Star Wars is back, Star Wars is dead, Star Wars is back. It's like this revolving door of insanity that we find ourselves in the Star Wars fandom. And it's like a new project comes out, you have your crowd of people that'll love it no matter what, and your crowd of people that are going to hate it no matter what. And it's been going on for a really long time, and I think a lot of fans that don't quite remember the prequel trilogy times and the Clone Wars times are kind of missing that. And again, it comes back to my point about blinded by nostalgia. I see a lot of people my age that are saying that there are no valid criticisms of the prequel trilogy or the Clone Wars show. There are plenty of valid criticisms about all of those projects. However, you are blinded by nostalgia. You remember it to be better than it is because that was what you grew up with your childhood. You're partial to it. And again, though, everyone is entitled to their opinions. Everyone is absolutely able to like something, dislike something, love something, hate something. It's just, I kind of get annoyed by, and this is, I guess, my final point, the gatekeeping. The gatekeeping of Star Wars is so annoying. I roll my eyes at it all the time. And the gatekeeping has changed as time has gone on, too. And that's, again, what's super funny to me. You'll have, like, a prequel fan that knows nothing about the expanded universe books from the 90s. You'll have an expanded universe fan that knows nothing about the Mandalorian universe, and everyone's pointing the finger at each other saying, you're a fake fan because you don't know this character that I grew up with. You're a fake fan because you don't know the name of this ship that I grew up with. And it's kind of funny to see, like, this game that we play generation to generation now with Star Wars. And obviously, I think the internet has definitely exasperated a lot of these issues because you have people on the internet who make a living off of YouTube, so they make these phony outrage clickbait videos to bring people in, and then there are people who take these people's words as gospel because, well, they have a huge following, I've been watching them for 10, 15 years now, and, I'm going to take everything they say as gospel. So it can become really difficult to kind of talk to people now because everything in, social media is so polarizing, and you have to be, it's almost tribal. You're trying to, fight against the other team, the enemy, you know, because they disagree with how you feel about something. But at the end of the day, we're all nerds. That's the part that gets me the most is, you know, you're fighting a battle, you're trying to die on a hill over a fictional universe. At the end of the day, who cares whose Star Wars is better than the other? If you like The Mandalorian, watch The Mandalorian. If you like The Rise of Skywalker, watch The Rise of Skywalker. If you like Return of the Jedi, watch Return of the Jedi. You don't necessarily have to like everything that Star Wars is putting out. Again, I don't like everything that Star Wars has put out in the last 10 years, but, you know, I've watched it all, I've consumed it all, and I'd like to talk about it with people. Recently, there's been reports coming out about Lucasfilm pulling back on how many Star Wars projects they put out, and I think that's honestly a good idea. You give writers more time to do their thing and be creative. You give departments more time to kind of allocate funds and kind of figure out the best way to maximize the budget, and I feel like we just have more time now to kind of let people cook on stuff, for lack of a better phrase, as opposed to, you know, just pumping out content and hoping it sticks. And I hope that in this kind of lull that we're finding ourselves in, where Star Wars projects are kind of spread out a little bit more, we can come to understand each other a bit more as fans. Maybe sit down, understand some things, you know, maybe rewatch some stuff that we don't like and have some conversations about it, be a little bit more constructive. And at the end of the day, hey, my channel is always here for people who want to have debates and discourse about Star Wars. There's stuff that I love that I'm sure you don't love. There's opinions I have that I'm sure you don't have, and vice versa. However, I like to have the conversations with people and seek to understand each other rather than try to make each other believe our point. So I guess the whole point of this little ranty video was it's interesting to see the irony in the Star Wars fandom over the decades of new content that's come out. You have prequel trilogy and Clone Wars fans pointing the finger at new media fans saying, your content sucks, it shouldn't be canon, where that generation, they might be too young to even remember. They come from a generation of media that they enjoy that had original trilogy fans pointing the finger down at them and saying, hey, your media sucks, your opinions suck, and your content should be made not canon. So in summary, I think just the Star Wars fandom kind of needs to become self-aware in a way and kind of realize that it's okay to like different things, and the fact that we have such an expansive franchise that is in one continuous timeline called Star Wars is awesome. I think Star Wars is the coolest franchise out of any franchise to exist. I think Star Wars is doing better than the MCU right now. I think Star Wars is doing better than most other franchises that are getting reboots and things like that right now. So I think that Star Wars is on the right track. So let's not ruin it for ourselves by, you know, just pre-ordering being mad at stuff, if for lack of a better term. You know, you see a trailer, you're already picking it apart saying it's going to be this, it's going to be that, it's going to be woke, it's going to suck. It's just, to me, it's exhausting. And I've really pulled back on my discourse when it comes to the Star Wars projects because it's gotten so tiring to try and have conversations with people who are just word vomiting YouTube videos. And I would like people to, and this is asking a lot, I would like people to think original thoughts and form their own opinions about something before we just go blindly, tribally hating on each other for different Star Wars projects. And I guess my final point is, you know, if there's stuff that's coming out in Star Wars that really makes you upset, that new stuff that's coming out will never be able to take away from the stuff that you enjoy. If you don't like the sequel trilogy and you don't like Luke's character arc in that movie, The Last Jedi, for example, you can go back and watch the original trilogy, and nothing that happens in The Last Jedi can ever take away from your enjoyment of the original trilogy. If you hate that Rey was the one that defeated Palpatine and that Anakin didn't become a Force ghost and do it himself in The Rise of Skywalker, you can still watch the prequel trilogy and experience Anakin that way. And you can watch him in the Clone Wars and plenty of other media that he's been in, and it doesn't take away from that. At the end of the day, find what you love about the franchise and be proud of that part of the franchise, especially more than likely if it's the one you grew up with. In about 5 to 10 years here, I think we're going to see a huge wave of sequel trilogy fans coming up out of the ashes because they're old enough to use the internet, and they're going to start posting video essays and talking about their nostalgia for the sequel trilogy, and that's something I'm really excited to see, because even though I don't appreciate those movies as much as the next Star Wars fan might, I am excited to see other people appreciating that media. So yeah, there's my rant. I was just kind of spitballing, yelling at the camera. I didn't really have any script for this. I was just kind of spitballing thoughts on a conversation. This is a conversation I have with my group of friends a lot. So definitely let me know in the comments what you thought of this topic. Do you think I'm stupid and wrong? Do you think that there's a part of Star Wars that still should be deleted from the canon? Let me know. Let me know why I'm stupid and wrong. Or let me know in the comments if you agree. If you want to just have some general Star Wars discourse about any of the points I made, feel free to drop a comment. You can also join in my Discord, which is linked in the description below. We can have more of these conversations with an awesome group of people, and all my other social media is linked in the description below as well. Guys, thanks for checking out the video. I'll catch you for the next one, and may the Force be with you.